It's accusing Pretoria of threatening its national security. Just days after South Africa hosted BRICS military drills.
An inquiry into Iran's participation in a joint naval exercise with certain BRICS member states.
South Africa is once again in Washington's crosshairs, this time accused of directly threatening U.S. national security. Just days after Pretoria hosted BRICS military drills, the U.S. moved aggressively to halt what it calls an illicit transfer of sensitive NATO-derived military technology to China. U.S. authorities filed a civil forfeiture complaint after intercepting 2 advanced mission crew trainers, mobile simulation systems, linked to the Test Flying Academy of South Africa, TFASA. These weren't seized inside China, but en route from South Africa itself. And here's the detail that already makes the story feel off: they were training simulators, not live weapons, missiles, or anything posing an immediate battlefield threat. Yet Washington's response was swift, public, and loaded with national security rhetoric, as if a full-scale espionage ring had been busted, not a shipment of training equipment. A civilian flight academy suddenly branded a strategic threat. Africa framed not just as a continent, but as the core problem. The outrage feels wildly disproportionate to what was actually intercepted. Why such alarm over gear passing through Africa, when the supposed end user is China? What does this reveal about Africa's true place in the global power game? Let's dig in. The real anxiety here isn't the simulators themselves, it's Africa's emerging role as a connector in the system. If the tech alone was the issue, authorities could have handled it quietly as an export violation at the destination. Instead, the drama exploded at the transfer point, long before arrival in China. That choice isn't random. It signals Washington's unease isn't just about the hardware, it's about an African institution positioning itself as a key intermediary in a high-stakes knowledge network. For centuries, Africa has been cast as a destination in global power structures. Resources flow out, aid and expertise flow in. Knowledge was imported, never exported or circulated by African actors. That one-way hierarchy felt so natural it became invisible. Why did African professionals always train under foreign supervision? Why host foreign bases without building equivalent global institutions? Why absorb talent into Western systems instead of creating autonomous ones? This case quietly shatters that pattern. TFASA didn't just host training or operate under oversight, it served as a conduit for expertise rooted in decades of Western, including NATO, military doctrine. 2 simulators won't tip the global military balance or give China capabilities it lacks. But an African entity acting as a neutral bridge between rival powers? That introduces unpredictability the old order wasn't built for. Intermediaries decentralize control. They create flows that can't be fully licensed, monitored, or politically gated. For systems relying on exclusivity and gatekeeping, that's existential disruption. The true fear isn't narrow security, it's the erosion of the assumption that Africa exists to be managed, not to manage flows itself. Why does Africa as intermediary threaten more than Africa as resource supplier? Suppliers stay inside structures designed by others, they provide inputs without reshaping the logic. Intermediaries sit at connection points, negotiating standards, granting access, redirecting flows. Historically, Africa's integration was extractive, supplying minerals, labor, territory without influencing distribution, value, or transformation. Even as key exporters, African nations depended on external markets and institutions. Power was material, not structural. Now, as an intermediary in strategic knowledge networks, Africa begins shaping who trains, who gains legitimacy, who accesses expertise. This power isn't in trade stats or budgets, it's durable, institutional. It lets African entities help design global ecosystems, not just react to them. That's what erodes hierarchies. Authority no longer originates solely from a handful of dominant states. The response feels like containment, not mere enforcement. Hierarchies tolerate dependent suppliers but fear autonomous intermediaries, who can choose partners, set new standards, bypass gatekeepers. Control diffuses, influence becomes unpredictable. For a global order used to monopolizing strategic knowledge, African intermediaries signal lost narrative dominance. What's striking? This emerges quietly, through professional networks, training partnerships, credibility, not loud confrontation. Africa doesn't need to rebel. It just needs to become indispensable. That's transformative because it can't be easily labeled opposition. The reaction feels emotional and moral, not purely legal or strategic, because it's challenging centuries-old identity, not just rules. Legal systems handle violations, psychological ones defend self-image. Terms like enabler, covert, national danger aren't regulatory, they signal perceived loss of control over meaning and authority. The global order's storyline frames Africa as needing guidance, rarely producing strategic knowledge. When African institutions generate and distribute high-level expertise, that narrative crumbles. Cognitive friction breeds emotional backlash. Similar activities by European or Middle Eastern entities rarely trigger existential alarm. Africa's competence remains suspiciously exceptional, rooted in historical exceptionalism. This isn't about broken rules, it's narrative control. If Africa circulates strategic knowledge without permission, Western leadership's natural status weakens. The West shifts from neutral arbiter to one competitor among many. So where is Africa heading? Toward a future where power isn't mapped by geography or alliances, but embedded in invisible networks, training pipelines, certification regimes, professional ecosystems. These determine who produces, validates, and transfers knowledge. African institutions are entering these layers, not through drama, but functional integration. Relevance now comes from indispensability in key networks, not size or wealth. This power is subtle, cumulative, hard to reverse, built on relationships and practices that sanctions can't touch. Africa's future won't hinge on aligning with one bloc, but on becoming an intersection point for multiple systems, resisting monopolization. A platform, not a client. A connector, not subordinate. For the next generation, especially African Gen Z, power means leverage through necessity, not ideological sides. They've seen loyalty reproduce dependency. Their focus, functional indispensability in global processes. Sovereignty as mobility across systems, not isolation. They seek African-owned platforms, certifications, research centers operating globally, not symbolic, but essential. Dissolving dependency by making Africa a neutral intersection on equal terms. Skeptical of threat/alliance narratives that reduce Africa to a contest site. This case? Not outrage, but recognition. Africa nearing a threshold where actions provoke global reactions because of rising relevance. The shift leads to no dramatic climax, just profound, irreversible structural presence. Africa becomes embedded in power's machinery, not guest or beneficiary, but functional component. Relevance shifts from perception to necessity. You don't debate what breaks the system if removed. Influence from usefulness, not symbolism. Negotiation over supervision, collaboration over conditionality, presence over permission. The old order finds this uncomfortable: no confrontation, no overthrow. Africa outgrows marginal roles, becoming too integrated to ignore or exclude. Power as deep embedding in systems others depend on. Not control, but indispensability. The real question, is the global order ready for a future reorganizing around Africa's presence, not its absence? Let us know in the comments, can the US really stop this shift? Want more on Black culture, history, civilization, and hidden truths? Like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell for videos nobody else covers. Thanks for watching, stay tuned.